Hello, we're going to continue our psychology reading of Schultz and Schultz, A Modern History of Psychology. Today, this short reading is going to be about scientific history and schools of thought. I'm going to go over some definitions, and that will be the end of this video. So, conceptions of scientific history. Two ways to view the historical development of scientific psychology are the personalistic approach and the naturalistic approach. In essence, we are asking which is the more important in accepting a new idea, the person who developed the idea or the times in which the idea is put forth. The personalistic theory is the view that progress and change in scientific history are attributable to the ideas of unique individuals. According to this viewpoint, progress and change are attributable directly to the will and charisma of unique persons who alone redirected the course of history. Copernicus, Napoleon, Freud, Hitler, before that, Darwin, etc. The naturalistic theory of history proposes that times makes the person, or at least makes possible the recognition and acceptance of what that person has to say, unless the zeitgeist and other contextual forces are receptive to the new work. Its proponent may not be heard, may be shunned, or even put to death. But society's response, too, depends on the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist is the intellectual and cultural climate or spirit of the times. Zeit meaning time in German, and Geist meaning spirit or time spirit. Spirit of the times, what Carl Jung refers to. So the naturalistic theory is the view that progress and change in scientific history are attributed to the zeitgeist, which makes a culture receptive to some ideas but not to others. Then we have schools of thought in the evolution of modern psychology. During the last quarter of the 19th century, the initial years of psychology's evolution as a distinct scientific discipline, the direction of the new field was influenced by Wilhelm Wundt, a German physiologist. Wundt had definite ideas about the form his new science would take. He determined its goals, subject matter, research methods, and topics to be investigated. In this pursuit, he was influenced by the spirit of his times, the current thinking in philosophy and physiology. And in the next lecture, we will go over some pertinent philosophers who were influences to the new psychology. And then we will go over after that, starting with Helmholtz, the physiological influencers that were a part of the new psychology. Nevertheless, it was Wundt in his role as agent of the zeitgeist who drew together threads of philosophical and scientific thought. Because he was such a compelling promoter of the inevitable, psychology was shaped by his vision. Before long, however, controversy arose among the growing numbers of psychologists. New social and scientific ideas were being advanced. Some psychologists, reflecting more modern currents of thought, disagreed with Wundt's vision of psychology and proposed their own. By around the year 1900 CE, several different systematic positions and schools of thought coexisted uneasily. We may think of them as differing definitions of the nature of psychology. The term school of thought refers to a group of psychologists who become associated ideologically and sometimes geographically with the leader of a movement. Typically, the members of a school of thought share a theoretical or systematic orientation and investigate similar problems. The emergence of the various schools of thought and their subsequent decline and replacement by other schools of thought is a striking characteristic of the history of psychology. This stage in the development of a science, when it is still divided into schools of thought, has been referred to as pre-paradigmatic. A paradigm or model or pattern is an accepted way of thinking within a scientific discipline that provides essential questions and answers. The notion of paradigms in scientific evolution was advanced by Thomas Kuhn. I have a lecture on Thomas Kuhn in my history lecture series. Go check it out. A historian of science, Kuhn was a historian of science, and he wrote in 1970 The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It has sold more than 7 million It has sold more than 1 million copies. The more mature or advanced stage in the development of a science is reached when it is no longer characterized as competing schools of thought, that is, when the majority of the scientists agree on theoretical and methodological issues. At that stage, a common paradigm or model defines the entire field. We can see paradigms at work in the history of physics. The Galilean-Newtonian concept of mechanism was accepted by physicists for 300 years, during which time virtually all physics research was conducted within that framework. Then, when a majority of physicists came to accept Einstein's model, which was a new way of viewing the subject matter, the approach of Galileo and Newton was replaced. This replacement of one paradigm by another is what Thomas Kuhn meant by a scientific revolution. Psychology has not yet reached the paradigmatic stage. Throughout psychology's history, scientists and practitioners have been seeking, embracing, and rejecting various definitions of the field. No single school or viewpoint has succeeded in unifying these assorted positions for very long. Cognitive psychologist George Miller, which is in fact chapter 15, said that no standard method or technique integrates the field, nor does there seem to be any fundamental scientific principle comparable to Newton's laws of motion or Darwin's theory of evolution. For many years, the state of psychology changed little. Scholars referred to the history of the field as a sequence of failed paradigms. Historian Ludi Benjamin wrote, quote, "A common lament among psychologists today is that the field of psychology is far along a path of fragmentation or disintegration, with a multitude of independent psychologies that soon will be or already are incapable of communicating with one another," end quote. Another contemporary psychologist described the field, quote, "not as a unified discipline, but as a collection of psychological sciences." That is Dewsbury in 2009. And yet another wrote in 2013 that psychology still hasn't settled on whether its subject matter is mind or behavior. It is ever more appropriate that the components of the American Psychological Association are called divisions because psychology becomes more fractionated with each passing decade. That is for Tanya in 2013. There are almost 60 divisions in the American Psychological Association, the largest psychological association in the entire world, including one on the history of psychology. Now, thus, psychology may be more fragmented today than at any time in its history, with each faction clinging to its own theoretical and methodological orientation, approaching the study of human nature with different techniques, and promoting itself with specialized jargon, journals, and the trappings of a school of thought. Each of the early schools of thought within psychology was a protest movement, a revolt against the prevailing systematic position at the time. Each school passionately criticized what it saw as the weaknesses of the older system and offered new definitions, concepts, and research strategies to correct the perceived failures. When a school of thought captured the attention of a segment of the scientific community, those scholars rejected the previous viewpoint. Sometimes leaders of the older school of thought never became convinced of the worth of the new system. Usually more advanced in age, these psychologists remained too deeply committed to their position, intellectually and emotionally, ever to change. Younger, less committed adherents of the old school were more easily attracted to the fresh ideas and became supporters of the new position, leaving the others to cling to their traditions in increasing isolation. The German physicist Max Planck wrote, quote, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it," end quote. That is Max Planck in 1949. Charles Darwin wrote, quote, "What a good thing it would be if every scientific man was to die when 60 years old, as afterwards he would be sure to oppose all new doctrines," end quote. Different schools of thought have developed during the course of history of psychology, each one an effective protest against what had gone before. Each new school used its older opponent as a base against which to push and gain momentum. Each position proclaimed what it was not and how it differed from the established theoretical system. As the new system developed and attracted supporters and influence, it inspired opposition, and the whole combative cyclical process began anew. What was once a pioneering, aggressive revolution became, with its own success, the established tradition, and inevitably it then succumbed to the vigorous force of the next youthful protest movement. Success destroys vigor. A movement feeds on opposition. When the opposition has been defeated, the passion and ardor for the once new movement die. It is in terms of the historical development of the schools of thought in psychology that we describe the advance of psychology. Great men and women have made important contributions, but the significance of their work is most easily understood when examined within the context of the ideas that preceded theirs, the ideas on which they built, and the work their contributions eventually inspired. Thank you. We will go over in this book structuralism, the psychology of Wilhelm Wundt in the school of thought called structuralism, developed from these philosophical and physiological traditions. The next lecture is going to be on philosophical influences, the next one on physiological influences. Then we're going to go from structuralism, followed by functionalism, and then into behaviorism and Gestalt psychology, all of which evolved from or revolted against structuralism. And on a roughly parallel course in time, though not in subject matter or methodology, psychoanalysis, during Freud and after Freud, grew out of ideas about the nature of the unconscious and the medical interventions to treat the mentally ill. Then psychoanalysis and behaviorism instigated a number of sub-schools. In the 1950s, humanistic psychology, incorporating principles of Gestalt psychology, developed in reaction to behaviorism and psychoanalysis. Around the year 1960, cognitive psychology challenged behaviorism to revise psychology's definition once again. The major focus of the cognitive system is a return to the study of conscious processes. That idea, along with contemporary and continuing developments, include evolutionary psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and positive psychology. And so thank you for watching. I hope this has been informative on the different two different types of scientific theory. We have naturalistic theory and personalistic theory, and then we have briefly just some of the schools of thought. So these schools of thought is structuralism. It was E.B. Titchener's system of psychology, which dealt with conscious experience as dependent on experiencing persons. We have functionalism, a system of psychology concerned with the mind as it is used in an organism's adaptation to its environment. We have behaviorism, Watson's science of behavior, which dealt solely with observable behavioral acts that could be described in objective terms. We have Gestalt psychology, a system of psychology that focuses largely on learning and perception, suggesting that combining sensory elements produces new patterns with properties that did not exist in the individual elements. Then we have psychoanalysis, which is Sigmund Freud's theory of personality and system of psychotherapy. Then we have humanistic psychology, a system of psychology that emphasizes the study of conscious experience and the wholeness of human nature. And then cognitive psychology, a system of psychology that focuses on the process of knowing, on how the mind actively organizes experiences. And of course, then we have other things like evolutionary psychology. Thank you for watching. Hope it was informative. See you in the next video.